Pope Francis made headlines this week for reportedly telling a gay man that God made him that way. Hello and welcome to A Spirited Debate. I'm Lauren Green. A Vatican spokesperson would neither confirm or deny the Pope's statement, saying, quote, "We do not normally comment on the Pope's private conversations." But religious leaders have been weighing in on the issue. Father Timothy V. Viveric, writing an op-ed in the online site The Catholic Thing, said in part, "If this way refers to the image and likeness of the Trinity and the calling to be a member of the body and bride of Christ, then the statement is true. If this way refers to the ill effects of the messed up world or of our sin, personal sin, then the statement is false." Here to weigh in, the editor-in-chief of The Catholic Thing, Dr. Robert Royal, and former Obama faith staffer, Christopher Hale. Welcome to you both.
Good to be with you.
Thank you for having us.
All right, so Robert, let me begin with you, because which is it? Was the Pope making a theological statement that God loves us no matter what, or was he saying there's nothing wrong with being gay, even though Catholic teaching calls it against divine and natural law?
Well, I don't think it was the latter. I think that there's a good deal of ambiguity about what he said to this young man, who, by the way, was one of the victims of sexual abuse by priests in Chile. So the Pope, who had at first ignored that sexual abuse there and actually even rebuked people who talked about it being a serious problem, I think was speaking in a pastoral way. We don't know exactly what he said, but he couldn't possibly have been saying that homosexuality per se is okay. Now, gay people, of course, are loved by God, just as all people who have been created by God are loved by him. But he could not possibly have been affirming a change in the teaching of the Catholic faith, because no pope can do that, because our doctrine is settled from ancient Hebrew times straight through the Old Testament, through the New Testament. And he probably, I think, was in some way expressing something approximating what that young man reported, but not what it's been speculated to be in the press.
Right, because it's just hearsay at this point. We weren't in that private conversation, so we're getting that information from the young man involved. So, Chris, what do you think the Pope really meant?
Well, look, I think that we see time and again that this is a Pope that has different emphases than his predecessor. Everyone knows that the Catholic Church's teaching is on gay marriage. Not enough people know, however, that Jesus Christ loves the LGBT community, each and every individual in the LGBT community, and that there should be no discrimination against the LGBT community. And I think the Pope really is emphasizing this aspect that has been, I would say, systematically undercovered in Catholic understanding of the world. I'm with Robert. I don't think the Church's teaching is changing. However, I think there is a new pastoral innovation. We are starting with what is good and praising it. When God sees a gay person, God sees goodness. God sees a human being with dignity and rights and worthy of our equality and respect. I think that Pope Francis is highlighting that, and I think it's a message that particularly young Catholics, we need to hear. We need to know that God loves each and every person, no matter our sexual orientation or gender identity or anything about us.
All right. But one of the big problems in interpreting the Pope's remarks is the starting point. And if you believe homosexuality is a sin, and the Bible talks about it as a sin, and the Catholic Church talks about it as a sin, then it's part of human brokenness. And you can explain it in terms of our fallen natures. But that runs counter to today's conventional and secular beliefs, like Chris is talking about, that it is not a sin. So, Robert, I mean, how can the Pope be clear on this issue? I mean, we're talking about the dignity of a human being on one hand, but then the fallen nature on the other. And if you're not speaking the same sort of starting point, you've really got some miscommunication going here.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly the right way to put it, because if you assume automatically that he's saying a different thing than, in fact, a Catholic would say, you're going to get a different message from this encounter with this young man. But look, I mean, as much as, I think Christopher put it quite well, as much as we know that God loves all human beings, and sinners, even terrible sinners, he tries to redeem them. As much as we accept that and we want to emphasize that, we have to be able to keep, at least as Catholics have to be able to keep in mind two things simultaneously. We know from the Scriptures, from the very first pages of Genesis, male and female, he created them. This is the biblical vision of human sexuality. Now, you know, in modern times, we live in a complex society in which legal and political and social Changes have made it difficult to deal with this question, but the teaching still remains the same, and we must start firmly with that in mind.
Okay,
now,
let me. I know you want to say more, but I have to get to Christopher because we've run out of time. But Christopher, I just want you to comment on that.
Look, I think that once again, I think that every Catholic is very aware of the Church's teaching on same-sex marriage and the like. I don't think what Catholics are aware of is that God's particular love for each and every person, and I'll say this particularly for the LGBT community. We know that God loves those who are marginalized. People are born with their sexual orientation. They are born with this, and God loves the human person at conception, at birth, and throughout the entirety of the life. I think we need to lift up that message, and I'm proud of Pope Francis for doing that.
Okay, and Dr. Robert, I just want you to comment on that because that's one of the controversies, too, that people are born with that, and I don't think the Catholic Church is quite clarified on that point either.
Yeah, and I don't think that the science is settled on this either. As far as I know, and I've looked into this rather extensively, there is no some convincing scientific evidence that people are born that way. In fact, in our culture, we talk about sexualities on a spectrum, about people transitioning from one sex to another.
Okay.
To put it in terms that God created these people as gay, I think is the wrong way to understand it from a Catholic perspective. Others will have a different view.
Okay,
but
all right.
I don't believe that the Pope was saying what Christopher just said.
Okay, Christopher and Robert, I want to thank you so much for being on a spirited debate, very spirited debate conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
And you want to check out my podcast, Lighthouse Faith, Moving Forward in Truth and Love. I'm Lauren Green. Thanks for watching.